think, 4 volumes, 4 separate recordings, which he never did make. He made a second one, but he never went on for the 3rd and 4th, as far as I know. It covered the history. This first recording covered the history of our country from the discovery of the New World by Columbus up through the Revolutionary War. Of course, all of it as seen through Freeburg's outrageously twisted lens. It actually begins, though, how many of you remember this or are familiar with it? Yeah, not very many, but, well, for one thing, you have to be as old as I am, probably, but still. Anyhow, if you can find it, go listen to it, because it's outrageously funny. It actually begins, as I recall, with Freeburg climbing out of the bedroom window of Queen Isabella when the king suddenly shows up unexpectedly. So it gives us an idea of why she granted Columbus the funding for his adventure. So those of you familiar with this work of Freeburg's may remember the scene where George Washington is about to make his famous crossing of the Delaware with his soldiers. The weather is terrible, spirits are low, as are supplies. But according to Freeburg, General Washington has more important things on his mind. He's having trouble deciding which boat to use for the crossing, the Donald Duck one or Goofy. His assistant can be heard imploring him to hurry. "Sir, the men are beginning to freeze." But Washington ignores him, instead standing first in one boat and then in the other, and asking his assistant, "What do you think? Is it me? Is it me?" He finally settles on the boat that's him, but then has trouble deciding which sandwich to buy for lunch, tuna or ham on rye. His last comment to his assistant is, "I guess I'll take the tuna, but I don't know, do you think it's me?" His assistant shouts, "It's you, General, for God's sake, it's you!" Now, I was reminded of that scene a few summers ago when I was visiting my sister and her family on Cape Cod. We had all driven into Provincetown one day with no purpose other than to wander the streets and, of course, shop. Not long after we arrived, I slipped into a hat shop. Now, I've always loved hats and have, at one time had quite a collection of them, though I actually never very often wore any of them. I just usually feel too self-conscious, as if it'll draw attention to myself, which might surprise you since I'm up here drawing attention to myself. But nevertheless, I never feel real comfortable wearing a hat. But in this hat shop, I began trying on some of the hats, but none of them particularly grabbed me. So I started to leave, and suddenly there was this one hat displayed on the counter of the shop that caught my eye. It was fairly unusual indeed. It was more than unusual. It was outrageous. I didn't have the nerve, though, to try it on because there were so many people standing around and I didn't want any attention. Still, the longer I looked at this hat, the more it called to me. And so I went out and found my sister and dragged her back to the shop to see this strange creation, and she insisted I try it on. Once on, she exclaimed, "Oh, Anne, you have got to buy that. It is so you." Still, I resisted, partly because it was expensive. For me, at the time anyway, I think it was over $30, and partly because I felt pretty self-conscious in it, and I didn't know where I would ever wear it. What would my congregation think about their minister appearing somewhere in it? Because ministerial it was not. But Judith kept insisting, and finally I gave in. I handed over the money, put on my new acquisition, and walked out the store. And as I walked through the streets, one person after another would come up to me and tell me how much they loved my hat and ask where I had found it, and I would have to deliver them the sad news that I had bought the last one. But the greatest moment came when a man standing in the doorway of a shop shouted out to me, "I love your hat, it is so you." And I shouted back, "But you don't even know me." And he said, "Doesn't matter, I can tell it's you." Now I have to take it off, or you won't listen to anything seriously. "Is it me?" we ask. "It's you," comes the reply. What does that mean? How is it that others, sometimes total strangers, can see something in us that we ourselves have not seen or have perhaps forgotten? How much of our true selves do we hide from the world? How much of our true selves do we even hide from ourselves? Great prophets through the ages have admonished us to let our light shine. I just love that you sing your children out with this little light of mine. It is so great. And the Buddha supposedly said to his followers just before dying, "Make of yourself a light." But how do we do that if we aren't aware of what our light is, or even if aware, are too afraid to let it shine? There was an 8-year-old child who was once asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. "I'd like to be myself," was her reply. "I've tried being other things, but I always failed." I wonder if she succeeded in being herself, or is she now in her 20s or 30s or even 70s and still saying, as so many of us still do, "If I could just learn to be myself." We live in a culture and a time which supposedly strives to set people free, which encourages us to express our true selves. It's certainly what we say that we want to teach our children and our grandchildren, yet at the same time, we live with labels and categories that lock us in before we are even known. We are labeled liberal or progressive or conservative, gay or straight, male or female, old or young, beautiful or plain, fat or thin. And we wear some of these labels from the time we are children. How are we to even know who we are and what we want by the time we're adults with all these categories we're supposed to fit into, let alone have the courage to be who we really are, which may not fit into any of those categories? How wise that little girl was to realize that she would only fail when trying to be something other than herself. The danger, of course, is that we might not fail at it, that we might succeed at submerging our true identity and live a facade, a lie, either to ourselves or to everyone else, or to both. Norman Cousins said, "What's tragic is not death, but what dies within us as we live. It is too easy to let die within us our authentic and beautiful selves in deference to what others want us to be, or at least our perception of what they want us to be." But how can we practice our Unitarian Universalist principle of acceptance of one another if we don't first accept ourselves in all our complexities? Our opening hymn, "Come, Come, Whoever You Are," actually has a descant to it that didn't make it into our hymn book, unfortunately. that while one group is singing the "Come, come, whoever you are," another group sings, "Though I've broken my vows 1,000 times, though I've broken my vows 1,000 times." We all know we break our vows over and over, our promises to do this or to do that. Yet here in this congregation, we are still welcomed. Some of you may be familiar with the game Dungeons and Dragons, which I guess is usually played as a computer game nowadays. But I learned it as a role-playing game while I was in seminary many years ago. We used only ourselves and our imaginations. A former student of the school, Marsh Agerbert, called himself the Dungeon Master and led a group of us through this fascinating game. Now, the first thing one does in Dungeons and Dragons is choose a role to play: cleric, warrior, that sort of thing. And then one chooses what's called an alignment. Now, as I recall, there are only two possibilities: lawful and unlawful. These alignments carry no judgment of good or bad. They simply reflect one's essential nature: lawful or playing by the rules, or unlawful, defying the rules. So I immediately claimed unlawful as my alignment with a great sense of relish and looked forward to plunging into the game. But as the game progressed, I kept making mistakes and getting myself and my teammates into trouble. I wasn't able to think the way they were thinking and often found myself confused. After a while, our dungeon master stopped the game and announced that he had put a spell on me, and he then led me out of the room. Once outside, felt like I was being sent to the principal's office. Once outside, he explained to me that under the spell, my alignment had now been changed to lawful. I was horrified. "What do you mean?" I cried. "Why in the world would you do that?" "Because that's what you are," said Marsh. "You are a lawful." "Oh, no, I insisted. "No, you don't understand. You don't really know me. I've been trained in civil disobedience. I support radical causes. I'm a socialist and a radical feminist. How can you possibly think I'm a lawful?" "Because," he said, "none of that other stuff matters. What matters is how you respond to situations, and your response is almost always to play by the rules. You are a lawful, Anne. It is your nature. To try to play the game differently will only get you killed off." I was crushed. I had so wanted to be the kind of person who disrupts the status quo, who pushes the boundaries, who never cares what others think. But over time, I've had to admit that Marsh was onto something. I am a lawful. I do play by the rules, even when participating in protest rallies and going and pushing boundaries. It doesn't mean that I am incapable of going against the grain of what's acceptable or am unwilling to. I have done it several times in my life. It only means that in such an instance, it takes extra energy from me and extra care. It isn't my natural way of being. It makes me uncomfortable. Marsh saw something in me, just as my sister Judith had in the hat shop. Only Marsh saw an aspect of me that was contrary to my self-image. Indeed, I was ashamed of it, and, if truth be told, still am at least a little embarrassed by it. Nevertheless, it was an aspect that was important for me to own. Knowing it keeps me out of unintended trouble. More importantly, Marsh pointed it out to me without the harsh judgments that I carried. He handed it to me as a gentle gift, wanting me only to accept myself fully for who I am. That is what we in a religious community can give to one another. The gift of recognition, the gift of encouragement to be fully who we are, the gift of acceptance of one another. This church is where one ought to be able, in the words of Emile Zola that are printed in your order of service, to be able to live out loud. And I am proud to be part of a denomination that calls us to live out loud, that welcomes us no matter where we are on our spiritual path, that has long welcomed and affirmed and supported bisexual, gay, lesbian, and transgender individuals, encouraging them to come out of the closets they may have been forced into by society. Yet there are others who may still feel unwelcome in our UU churches, people who identify as Christians perhaps, theists, Republicans, working class folks, those without a college degree, and people of color. We still need to look at our assumptions and open our hearts and minds to all who seek what we have found here. We need to invite everyone to live out loud with us. There is an exercise conducted sometimes in workshops as a way for people to get to know one another without the usual trappings of persona. Each participant is asked to introduce ourselves, but without ever saying what we do for a living, or how old we are, or where we live, or whether we are partnered or not. We must strip ourselves of all the facades behind which we normally hide and try to get down to the essence of who we are. It's not easy, at least not for me, as most of us tend to identify ourselves by superficialities. I'm a minister, I have 2 children and grandchildren, I live in LA, etc. But none of that says who I am at my heart. None of it really says where my passion lies. My Carmen Miranda hat may say more about my essence than do those facts of my life. So, who are you? Where does your passion lie? How would it be for you to come out of whatever closet might still be hiding your essence? The path to intimacy, whether that be with another human being or with one's God, begins with a deep knowing and sharing of ourselves. We become open to others and to our understanding of the eternal, not by being who we think others want us to be, but by being who we truly are and loving that. The path to one's God is simply an extension of the path to oneself. We must stop the voices that tell us who we should be and get back to that one clear voice within us which says, this is who I am. This is who I celebrate. This is the me I will love. That might mean wearing an outrageous hat with plastic fruit on top. But more importantly, celebrating who you are might mean taking the risk of speaking your truth openly and clearly. It might mean living your faith and praying out loud. It might mean entering a love relationship that could cause you to be rejected by others. What's important is to be able to look at at yourself in the mirror and say, "It's me." I close with one of my favorite stories, which many of you may have already heard before. It's of the beloved Hasidic Rabbi Zusha. He had grown old and was nearing death. One day his students gathered around his bed, listening carefully to any final lessons he might give them. One of his students finally asked, "Rebbe, are you not afraid to meet the creator of the universe? Do you not fear what he will ask of you? What judgments he will make? What if he asks, for instance, why during your lifetime you were not more like Moses or Abraham or Isaac? How will you answer him?" Zusha breathed heavily and laboriously as he pondered this question. Finally, he turned toward his student and said clearly, "When I meet the creator of the universe, he will not ask me why I was not more like Moses or Abraham or Isaac. He will only ask why I was not more like Zusha." Do not wait until your meeting with the creator of the universe. It may never come. Indeed, do not even ask why you have not been more like yourself. Instead, simply and joyfully be no other than yourself in all your unique and complex wonderfulness. Be yourself. You are beautiful. Be yourself. You have a light that shines. Be yourself. You are made of the same stuff as the stars and the trees and all creation. You have the life throb of ages dancing in your blood at this very moment. Love it. Amen. For benediction, I offer you these words by Beverly and David Bamba. Our church exists to proclaim the gospel that each human being is infinitely precious, that the meaning of our lives lies hidden in our interactions with each other. We wish to be a church where we encounter each other with wonder, appreciation, and expectation, where we call out of each other strengths, wisdom, and compassion that we never knew we had. Let us go in peace and with passion. Shalom, salam, namaste, alleluia.